Before we start this show, just a word from our sponsor, 20 by 20 Apparel. Founded in 2015, 20 by 20 Apparel brings original tributes to pro wrestling's classic arenas, moments, and events. They look to spotlight the bloopers, bleeps, and body slams along with the biggest, smallest, strangest, and strongest that pro wrestling has had to offer. Along with their awesome line of pro wrestling apparel, they do offer many services. In the world of wrestling, there are hundreds of shirts, promotions, flyers, social media accounts, and ads. Don't get lost in the sea of parody shirts and display fonts. They can provide professional graphic design services at a reasonable price. 20 by 20 also hand screen prints all the tees in-house. If you would like to discuss possible run of tees, posters, koozies, foam fingers, or whatever, drop them a line. Go to 20 by 20 Apparel. That's the number 20x, the number 20 apparel.com. Now, let's get to the show.
Fresh is the word.
I'm Jim Duggan, got long wood for plenty hoes. I keep it fresher than fresh, but you already know. You suckers bummy, I'm money, I got a ton of flows. My weed loud like a motherfucking thunder roll. Your shit quiet like you ballin' on a budget though. We see your kicks and we laugh and yellin' what are those. You see me shining like a suit on puffy. You know my grindin' shit is too strong, buddy. That's why the dude call money. I be stuntin' like it's nothing at all. Cause it's nothing to me, it's probably something to y'all. Trying to smoke like me, then come and fuck with your dog. Got a closet full of kicks, you can't cop it tomorrow. And I'm fresher than the freshest, you can tell it's in my essence. Bitch, you see the way I'm rapping, yes I do this shit to death. Until I'm running out of breath, or tell somebody cut a check. But either way you know it's fresh, and either way you know it's fresh. Fresh, we fresh. Fresh, fresh, goddammit, we fresh.
Welcome to the Fresh of the Word podcast. I'm your host, Kelly K. Fresh Frazier. It's episode 100. It's here. What a landmark episode. And for this landmark episode, I wanted to get someone special, someone whose work has been important to me over the years. After contacting a short list of names, I landed on two people that would fit the part. First, Brooklyn hip-hop legend Masta Ace, who will be on this episode. And then also Detroit techno pioneer Carl Craig, who will be on the next episode, episode 101. It's been almost 3 years that I've been doing Fresh is the Word. I never knew what would become of it or how long it would last. I'm at least happy that I got to 100 episodes, and I'm still trooping on. There's much more room to grow, I do know that, and I hope episode 100 will be like the newest jumping off point into this next phase of the show. I really do have so many people I would love to thank for their help along the way, but there is just like way too many to name. I'll probably just tag them all on Facebook. so check on Facebook. So this is only the beginning. So let's get on to the guests for the show. During my chat with Masta Ace, we talk about a lot of things in regards to his hip-hop history and how he's influenced other MCs. And we talked about his effect of his 2001 album, Disposable Arts, and how he's been able to sort of maneuver throughout his hip-hop career, being a part of so many eras and generations of hip-hop. So without further ado, let's get on to my interview with Masta Ace. When anybody thinks of, Masta Ace, probably, one of the guys who file under your favorite rapper's favorite rapper. You've been very influential to so many people. Kind of looking back to your career, how does it feel to be so influential to so many MCs out there?
To be honest with you, I don't know. I mean, there's a few names, there's a few artists that have, either mentioned me or said to me personally that I was, one of their influencers or somebody who that, had an impact on the music they were making, but it's not really a lot of people. At least they keep it to themselves. I'm usually one of those artists that's not going to be mentioned by the average cat. just because of I don't have a whole bunch of platinum records, but it's cool for those that have said it to me. Cats like Eminem, of course, but even like lesser known cats that just were coming. I remember in the '90s, very early '90s, Q-Tip and Fife speaking to me about uh, loving some of my early music and that it energized them when they were first starting out.
Right.
And at the time, we were peers. Obviously, Tribe Called Quest has gone on to become icons in hip hop, but you got to look back to when we were all just brand new, fresh starting out, and to hear those kind of words is always going to be a cool thing.
Yeah, you're somebody who, came from the 80s. You were part of the Juice Crew. You in the 90s, very much a part of that golden age of hip hop. And then with the new millennium, you had sort of, what I've seen online, you call your new beginning with Disposable Arts. How do you feel like you were able just to go from each one of those decades and be relevant?
To be honest with you, it's because I feel like I still had something to prove, and just like a new artist coming out for the first time, he's out to kind of prove to the industry that he deserves to be there, prove to other rappers that he's a good rapper, prove to the label that they made a good decision in signing him, whatever the situation is. But you have that chip on your shoulder, and I feel like I've always carried that chip. Like I was a new artist, underappreciated. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody really was respecting what I was doing. And some of that is, false motivation, because obviously there was fans out there that liked what I was doing, but I sort of psyched myself up by saying that nobody liked what I was doing. Nobody was checking for me. Nobody was feeling the music that I was making. And that's one of the ways that I was able to keep my edge and, keep making records that sounded fresh and hungry and new and aggressive. And I just really felt like I didn't get my due. And so that motivated me. Not getting my due, or maybe, people say I'm one of the most underrated artists. Maybe that in and of itself was a motivation for me.
How important do you feel like it is to keep that competitive edge over the years? And do you feel like hip hop MCs, hip hop artists these days still have that competitive edge?
Nah, the competitiveness, I don't see it as much. If they're competing, it's just for sales. It's just for record sales or likes or followers. That's the only real ways that I see the newer generation of artists competing. I don't feel like they're competing for lyrical, skill. I don't think it's about that. I think it's just about, oh, I sold this many records. And it's unfortunate. I wish that it was still competitive in that way. Also, like, in the golden era, 90s or whatever, performances were very competitive. Artists we were all trying to outdo each other on stage. Even if you went, especially if I went before you, I wanted to make sure that I tore it down so badly that it was going to be difficult for you when you stepped on stage, and you had to raise your level just to follow me. And that was the mentality that we all had, back in the 90s. I still carry that same competitiveness with me, but I don't think it exists as much with the newer artists.
Yeah, back in the 90s, there used to be, used to have albums that now we deem classic coming out almost like on a weekly basis. And everybody kind of knew who had albums coming out. What sort of competitiveness did that bring out, knowing who else was going to put out an album around the same time you were thinking?
Well, you got to remember, when you're living it, when you're in the middle of it, in the midst of it, you don't know what's classic and what's not. Like,
yeah,
it takes 10 years before you realize, wow, like that was a classic album. Like, but at the time, you know what? The perfect example of that is Nas Illmatic. That's undeniably a hip hop classic.
Right.
But at the time, but at the time that it came out, there were there were some circles that were saying it was not successful because it hadn't reached. It struggled to go gold. Like it was squeaking along, trying to. It took like a year to go gold.
Right.
And meanwhile, like on the West Coast, they were dropping albums. Their things was going platinum in 4 weeks. And so like in that same environment, Illmatic, people were kind of like, oh, maybe it's not all that. Maybe it's not this, not that. And New York was bumping it crazy, but it took time. It took Nas' second album really to come out. It was what I think pushed Illmatic gold.
Right.
I could be wrong about that detail, but I think Illmatic went gold a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years after it came out. It finally went gold. Now it's probably certified platinum now, but I'm just saying, you don't know necessarily what is a classic when you're in the midst of it. It's not until years later. When I dropped Disposable Arts in '01, it was kind of like, okay, this guy put out another album after all these years, and there weren't really that many people really paying attention to it, but it snuck into, the fabric of hip hop fans and into their bones and into their bloodstreams. And talk about that album now, so many years later, everybody's like, yo, I remember when that came out. Man, I didn't realize it, but that was a classic album.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's that's how it is. It's hard to know when you're in the middle of it, living it, what it is.
Between when Disposable Arts came out in '01 and before that, the previous album was Sitting on Chrome, correct?
Yep.
Those were almost like two different eras of how the music business ran. From your perspective, how did it look from your end?
Well, you went from vinyl and CDs being really ruling the day, and that was what generated most of the sales in '95. In '95, we were still putting out cassette singles.
Right.
Those were still a thing. Because by the time 2001 came around, cassettes, like, you couldn't find cassettes really. Like, it wasn't worth it for labels to spend the money to put out cassettes because nobody had cassette players anymore. And all of a sudden, the digital age started happening. And when I recorded Sitting on Chrome, I was in a big studio recording on a 2-inch tape machine, like on actual tape. By 2001, they had these machines called ADATs, which was like these little tiny digital cassette things. And you just saw like this major shift from that album to Disposable Arts. So many things, all of the record stores, like the Big Tower Records, all those stores started closing, going out of business. Record labels started shutting their doors left and right. It kind of ushered in the time where artists are now going in the studio and recording 40 songs in order to pick the songs for the album. In 1995, when I made this Sitting on Chrome, every record that I recorded was intended for the album. Like, there wasn't any throwaways. There wasn't any. Everything had a specific purpose. The album wound up being too long, so I think we held off 2 or 3 songs because it just was too much music. But just the idea of, you talking about, 6 years to now in '01, in an era where dudes is like, oh yeah, I'm going to studio, I'm recording 4 songs a day. And so, like, how much how much real thought could go into rhymes that you're writing on the same day and going in the booth and recording 4 songs. It's not possible. And it just seemed like the amount of thought, the amount of energy, the amount of time put into the music that was being made became less and less, and it just became more about the single, that one big single that had a cool hook, and if you could sell 1 million copies off that one single, then you were a success.
Do you feel like it turned in more of the music turned into more of a commodity than an art during that time?
During which time?
When you were putting out Disposable Arts, when it's the beginning of the 2000s, do you feel like more people were just sort of, maybe just doing content, or just, trying to figure it out the best way of making money in regards to
Yeah,
it?
it
But
was just
at yeah,
it was almost like volume, volume over quality. You know, I think about this graffiti documentary that came out like in 83, 82, 83, called Style Wars.
okay,
And there were two different graph art. There were two groups of graph artists in the documentary. There were the guys that were the artists that were spending 2 hours in a train yard painting this beautiful, big, colorful masterpiece covering the entire train. And then the other side was the bombers, and the bombers, all they did was do a quick throw up. Like it took them what, 2 minutes maybe to put up a throw up.
yeah,
Oh, and they went through the train yards, and they would find these masterpieces, these beautiful, pieces of art that took somebody 2 hours to make, and in 2 minutes they would completely destroy it by putting up a quick throw up and covering it up. And so it was kind of, there was that battle between the two forces, the two types of artists. The bomber artist, who was all about, I remember the guy's name was Cap. He was the main one that was going over everybody. And they interviewed him, and he's like, to me, it's all about, more, having the most. It's like, what's more important, having your name up on the next 50 train cars that go by, or one big burner on one car on every, 25 car trains that go by. For him, it was all about quantity. And, that was like a real conflict between the two groups. And so I just feel like I'm more of the graffiti artist than the bomber.
Do you feel like during those times that you felt like there was all these bombers in hip hop, and that maybe your the audience out there would sort of gravitate to those bombers, that you see their name everywhere and feel like, hey, maybe they're more popular because I see their name everywhere?
That's what happened. I mean, that's absolutely what happened. And it became for the fan, it became like easy consumption, much easier. Just, you hear it, the beat catches you, the chorus catches you, you can dance to it. I understand what he's saying, and it creates a moment, and then I'm good. I'm on to the next thing. With the music that I was making, there was you had to have a real commitment to the project, not just this one song, but the project, the story that's being told on the album, the sequence of the songs, the skits in between. It was an experience. So it's like, if you want to use a television comparison, it's like, do you want to watch a 30-minute sitcom where, it comes on, you get a couple of laughs in 30 minutes, eat a snack in 30 minutes, you're done, you're on to the next thing? Or do you want to sit down and watch a 2.5 hour movie that has all of this great acting and all of these, highs and lows and emotions and incredible filmography? And so that's really what it comes down to. A lot more fans were happier to get that quick consumption where there's not this big time commitment. I don't have to sit here and listen to the whole project to be entertained. I can just listen to this one song and keep it moving. And that there's room for everything. There's room for everything. There's I'm for the fans that want to watch the 2 hour movie, and that's who I make my music for.
During these times when there's so much quick consumption, how do you sort of swim the waters of all that to be able to still be making music here in 2018?
I just stick to what I know. I stick to what feels good to me. I stick to what I would want to hear as a fan, and I make projects that reflect the way I would want to be entertained as a fan. And you know, that's why it's tough for me sometimes to listen to a lot of albums when uh, there's no real thought put into the songs, the sequence of the songs, the order of the songs. Each song kind of stands on its own, has its own moment in time, and you can listen to that one song and get a quick message and be on to something else. Um, I mean, that's just my take.
Do you think that just the history of rap music has been good with sort of transitioning to new generations? Meaning, like these days, you might have some of the new rappers who don't really know about the history or might talk shit about the past, and then you have some of the old heads where they might talk down on the newer generation. Do you think that there's been a good transition between the generations, and is there a way that it could be improved on to where history gets passed down between new generations?
That's a tough one. It's tough because you really need each each young man that likes hip hop, listens to hip hop, is going to be influenced more by the people that are his age, his friends, the people that are around him. Typically, kids that are 18, 19, 20, they kind of view their parents as corny, and we probably viewed our parents the same way. Um, so it's almost like not cool to like what your parents like, unless you were trained by your parents at a very young age that this is what real music is, um, and they were playing it around the house all the time. That's different.
Right.
That's who my mom was. So my mom, my uncle, my mother and my uncle, they played Earth, Wind and Fire and Ohio Players and Gil Scott Heron around the house while I was coming up in hip hop. They didn't really understand hip hop or rap music. Um, it was kind of more of a youth movement to them. But because I was exposed to the music that they had from the 70s, um, and even the 80s, it kind of helped me to appreciate what came before hip hop. And so, in that same way, it would really take for parents, people my age, a little older, a little younger, um, to be exposing their children to Tribe Called Quest and De La Soul and music like that. My daughter's 13 years old now, and I've exposed her to some certain songs that mean something to me, but I feel like I could have done a much better job of, playing music around the house, in the car. I, as adults, as parents anyway, we kind of typically will just kind of acquiesce to whatever keeps the kid quiet, whatever keeps them calm. You want to listen to, you know, the Wiggles, go ahead, listen to the Wiggles. That keeps you calm. And so, I'm guilty of it, as well. Um, she does know some artists. She's aware because of because of myself and my wife. We're hip hop heads. Um, but she also has her generational stuff that she listens to and that she likes as well. And I don't want to be a tyrant and be like, oh, you shouldn't be listening to that. I don't want to walk around the house like being this grumpy, you know, uh, old dad who doesn't understand the new sound or whatever. So I kind of let her kind of do her thing, the same way my mom kind of let me do my thing. And the appreciation of other kinds of music and stuff will seep through. It will seep through. It will have an impact. And I think when she's in her, by the time she's in her 20s or something, I think she'll know more hip hop, more generational hip hop than most kids her age.
Do you feel that hip hop has a place of, especially with the newer generations that come, to be able to for these newer artists to learn from the history more in regards to the mistakes that have been made? Because you still have artists who are getting arrested, getting into fights, getting killed, and it just seems like it's a almost like a continually full circle that keeps on going on and on. Is that a thing that hip hop can learn from itself, or is that just something that's more based in the socio-economical places that these artists are in currently?
It's definitely more socio-economical than anything. Um, Whether these people are artists or not, these things are happening in their neighborhoods. You know, gun violence and alcohol abuse and drug abuse and domestic abuse. Those are just parts of our society, ugly parts of our society that young people are exposed to, whether they're rappers or not. It just so happens that if a rapper gets is a victim of gun violence, we hear about it. It makes the blogs, the headlines, the people talk about it. Um, but for every rapper that happened, that like XXX Tentacion, for every when he got killed, that was a terrible, tragic thing. But in the days leading up to him being killed, there was probably 50, 100 kids that got killed in the same way, totally different situations around the country, and probably a bunch after him that nobody's talking about, other than that local news station. So it's it's more of a it's more of a product of our society and what's been going on in in urban America and just America in general. But gun violence is a terrible product of what this country has become.
Yeah, hip hop has always been sort of like that. Is always told what's going on in the streets. Always been sort of like that news reporter. Does hip hop still do a good job of talking about those other cases, those other kids that get killed, or those other sort of domestic violence, other things that happen on the streets? Do you think hip hop is still doing a good job with addressing these issues?
I think the issues are being addressed in music all the time. The question is that music being played on the radio with the same uh, at the same rate that they're playing Migos and Cardi B and records like that? That's where the problem lies. It's not whether or not the music's being made, because it's being made, but the people, what our community hears on the radio, aren't willing or aren't interested in playing that music. They tell us, "Oh, the kids don't want to hear that." But we know from the 90s that when Public Enemy and X Clan and KRS-One BDP were making this positive music, Poor Righteous Teachers were making this positive music that spoke to young urban America. It was on the radio. We were listening to it. We knew the words to it. We went to the clubs. We went to the concerts, and we rocked out to it. And that was the balance that hip hop had at one point. Um, Now the agenda seems to be a lot different, and all of that positive music that's still being made seems to now be suppressed, and it's not as exposed to our young people. You have to almost be a miner and dig and search the internet and
Yeah.
to find this positive music. It's out there, But if we're relying on, you know, Radio One or Clear Channel to push those messages through to our young people, they don't seem to be interested in doing that. And that's the unfortunate part. But you only have to look you look high enough up that ladder, and you'll find out who exactly is making those calls.
It does seem like it is. Does seem like it. That is a big myth that people don't want to hear that stuff on the radio. When you look out to all of the peaceful protests that are going on in America for whatever is the new issue or new incident that's happening, that we got to people got to do that over and over again. You have people going out and protesting and making their voices heard. So you can't really tell people that people don't want to hear that stuff. It's like people want to hear that type of stuff. And like you said, back in the day, you had like the Public Enemies that people really enjoyed listening to, and it uplifted them. So that is definitely a big myth, I think.
It's absolutely a myth.
So when you go back to, I remember when Disposable Arts came out, like all of us, hip hop heads at the time were like, holy shit, this is such a good album. And this is kind of like I said, like almost it's like a new era of hip hop. There was a lot of artists, going the independent route during that time, because let's say about 4 years before that was when there was it seemed like there was a break where, people who were on major labels were no longer on major labels. The major labels were having more of a stronghold on hip hop, marketing it the way that they wanted to. But it was great to see, like, to hear, that album. It was so good. It was so poignant. And then if you just think about it, 17 years later, people still love that album. What's your thoughts about that particular album and how it's like over the years has meant so much to so many people?
Well, it's my favorite. It's my favorite album of mine that I made, because it came from probably the most honest place that it could come from at that time. What I was going through, um, was a lot going on in my mind, in my heart. There's a lot happening. The year before, I had been diagnosed with MS, and I was already kind of at the point where I figured that my music career was done, that fans weren't interested in hearing anything else from me, and I just didn't think that there was anybody out there who cared what I did musically, and that diagnosis kind of rejuvenated me, and I went on tour. I did a tour, a 13 city tour in the UK, in the United Kingdom. There was actually a couple in the UK and then a couple in Germany. And I came back from that tour and realized that there were actually still people out there who cared what I was doing. And that's what put me back in the studio with this kind of renewed commitment to doing some more music. And it was the first time I wasn't attached to a major. I didn't have the influence of any record executives telling me what kind of music to make, what kind of tempos the songs needed to be, who should be doing the hooks. Those are the kinds of things that I had really reached kind of my breaking point, where I felt like if I had to deal with all of this talk from people who didn't actually make records, if they were going to be the ones trying to, drive the car, then I would just rather stay home. But once I was realized that I could actually go in the studio and just literally do the exact record that I wanted to do, I felt like it was going to be a great way to go out of the game. I thought that was going to be my last album, so I felt like I'm going to go out on my note, on my terms. Disposable Arts is going to probably be the last one, but at least I'm going to when it's all said and done, I can't blame anybody else. I can say it is what it is. Let the chips fall where they may. But this, I'm gonna make every song, every hook, every skit, every lyric, every feature is gonna be exactly the way I envisioned it, and then let the chips fall where they may. And that's what happened. And because of that album, I mean, solely because of that album, my career has been extended now 17 years. It's amazing that I've been going this long, and it's all fueled by that one album. So my favorite will always be my favorite in my catalog. I have a special place for that album in my heart.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy that all those years, dealing with being on major labels, having exposure on MTV, being on MTV Raps and stuff like that, it all kind of comes down to being able to just have freedom to breathe and make art that sort
Yep.
of rejuvenated your life and your career.
And it brought the best out in me. Musically, it brought the best out in me. Lyrically, everything.
How important do you feel like, for any artist that having sort of that freedom to breathe, goes into making good music?
It's everything. It's everything. You can't make you can't make music from a place where people who don't rap, who don't produce, are telling you what you need to do or how you need to do it. And when you're making records from a position of pressure, they're never going to be the right records. Um, I think every song needs to be made from the heart, and when you start making songs with your mind, that's when you run into trouble. You start you start trying to come up with formulas. Well, we need to have a record that sounds like that and that talks about that, and then it's all formulaic, and you might get lucky and get a hit out of that, but more likely than not, it's going to fall on deaf ears, and then you're not even going to have your fan base anymore. So I think that position of freedom, being able to go in the studio on your terms and create what you want to make, brings out the best in every artist.
Yeah, I feel like, a lot of, and looking back, I feel like a lot of times when people thought about those formulas to try to make hits or have hits that land, that sometimes artists have chose the wrong singles from their albums. And there's been times where I feel like, oh my God, you just missed an opportunity for that song to be a single, and that might have been a hit single, but the only reason why you didn't choose it as a single is because it's kind of like a similar tune to the first single that you had. That's
Right.
where I'm like thinking you should have just went with what was kind of like the best instead of like we need to put out this record and then this type of record, then this type of record. Like that, I looking back, I felt like a lot of those formulas were just real bullshit.
You hit it right on the head. They were, and a lot of artists fell for the okey doke. A lot of us did.
When I look back to your career and when I think about all the albums that you put out, what I liked about you is you're from Brooklyn, but like you never really had a sound that was just distinctly New York. You kind of went in all these different routes because if you listen to like Born to Roll or the INC ride, that definitely had a West Coast feel to it. Like how important was it to sort of keep that sort of sound open, that variety open? And do you feel like it was needed for any artist, or do you think it was kind of bullshit to harp so much on having a particular regional sound?
I mean, the idea that you had to sound like a specific coast or a specific region is what kind of got hip hop into the trouble that it got into.
Right.
In the mid late '90s, um, and I definitely was right in the midst of that, because New York was definitely not happy with me when I started getting all this radio play in California and Texas and you know in the Midwest. Um, it was almost like you had to pick a side. You with us, you with them, and I don't know. I feel like hip hop at that time anyway kind of suffered a little bit from it because of it because there could have been a lot of other really cool music that could have been made um, by different artists from different places had hip hop had a little bit more tolerance to the 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 uh, the mixing of sounds, the experimentation of sound and a vibe, and um, it's different now. Like you could really, I mean, all these New York kids, these young New York kids, they all sound like they always making records that sound like trap music from the South, and that was kind of their sound. But clearly, there's no rules anymore. I just think there's nothing wrong with regional music. I just think that people need to know. Like when I made Born to Roll, like I knew exactly, what type of audience that was gonna grab, the sound of it. Even though the record I sampled was a East Coast record, it was a Def Jam on a Def Jam label. It was original concept. It was a straight East Coast record, but it was kind of a throwback sound. But I knew that the 808s, 909s, those drum sounds were really resonating with other markets, not just the West Coast, but the Midwest and the South.
Yeah.
And so it was a no-brainer to sample that record and make that song or remix that song. But you know, I still knew what New York drums sounded like, and I had joints on my album that were inherently New York feel, New York vibe to them, and it's like the newer artists now from New York, they don't even know what New York's sounding music is. Like if you want to experiment and do a record that sounds like a trap record, that's one thing, but when your whole project sounds like that and you don't have any connection to any other sounds and you're from New York, that's when it becomes a little bit of a problem. You got to be able to you got to at least know it all. You can't just know one thing and just make one thing.
Right. Recently, I was reading on your Twitter page, and I saw that like that there was talk about how in the new movie Sorry to Bother You, that
Oh, that happened today, yeah.
yeah, the Detroit character has those earrings that say murder, 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 kill, 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 and that the discussion came up about where that came from, and and you said that you were originally the one who said that, and it was a parody of what the what gangster rap was at that time. How do you feel
Right.
like that? This kind of like came full circle, and sort of those words are kind of being used again, like a parody of something.
I haven't seen the show. Is it a cool show? I haven't
I
seen
still
it.
haven't watched I haven't seen the movie yet either, but I was just
Oh,
like,
it's a movie.
yeah, it's a
Okay, I
movie.
thought it was a TV show. What's it called?
It's called Sorry to Bother
Sorry to
You.
bother you.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, I think that's cool. It doesn't add up to any checks or anything coming my way, but it's just cool. It's just cool that you'd be surprised like who who's listening and who has grown up and are now in their 40s and 50s that were kids when you were making records that you were making. Um, you could bump into somebody waiting for a flight. Looks like the most buttoned up business guy, is riding in first class or whatever. And come to find out, like when he was 18, he was rocking to Disposable Arts, and you're like, wow, like imagine that, like that's crazy, like. But these are the today's adults now, and a lot of them connected to hip hop in one way or another, and there was influence musically for them in their lives in some way. Maybe that writer or that director or whoever was responsible for putting that in the movie. Maybe that had an impact on him in some way when he was. Who knows where he's from? He might be from. He might be from St. Louis. I remember
I believe it was
having.
it's Boots Riley from the Coup, like that did that movie.
It's okay. Okay. I didn't realize that's his joint. Okay,
Yeah.
well, uh, I believe he said that Spice One or somebody else had said that same lyric um before me or something like that, which is very possible. I'm not aware of it. Um, and mine, I didn't hear those records and go, let's put this in our record. Like that's not how we did. That's not how we did things back then.
Right.
But that was a vibe, and that was the kind of stuff that was being, shouted. I would actually like to hear that Spice One record. Or he named he named two records that apparently said that phrase before my Slaughterhouse album in '93. Which I'd like to hear him.
Right. Yeah, like yeah, I do vaguely remember, Spice One saying something like that back then, but I also like remember like your records being that record being the first, like one of the first to say something like that also, but yours was a parody of it all.
Right, and maybe I don't know. I have no idea, but interesting nonetheless.
When you were sort of like speaking of that time, like when you're part of that time when you were seeing gangster rap sort of being ushered in into the music industry, and then you're seeing a lot of the rappers that kind of came out of it, whether they're really living that life or not. What was like sort of your thoughts looking back to how gangster rap got ushered into music, and then sort of what it became years after.
What bothered me about it was that and maybe maybe the powers that be didn't realize this at the time, but maybe they did. Um, it was almost like they were trying to neutralize what Public Enemy and Boogie Down Productions and Poor Righteous Teachers and X Clan and Paris and other groups were doing by empowering our young people in a way, making education important. Being smart was a cool thing. Knowing your history was a cool thing. Um, and it was almost like when the black exploitation movies came out. Um, like it was a way to suppress um, the I'm black and I'm proud movement, and to keep that movement suppressed and push something else out there that was a little bit more I don't know if negative is the right word, but certainly in the opposite of what was pride and education and intelligence. Um, I just it was bothersome to me that became the law of the land. Every label now is trying to sign the next NWA because NWA they went platinum, they went double platinum, triple platinum, whatever number they did. And all of a sudden, every record label was trying to find the next NWA, and they were signing everything, regardless if it was good or not. As long as if you could say on the record, they were trying to sign them. And a lot of that stuff, you know, it infiltrated the minds of the young people in the community, and it infiltrated a lot of musicians, and guys were going in the studio basically saying stuff on records that they they just thought it sounded cool. It was crazy. It was the crazier you could sound on a record, the more guns you could rap about made you hardcore. Maybe you would go platinum. Maybe you sell a lot of records like NWA. and there was just so much fakery going on during that time. Like a lot of these guys were just saying it to say it. It goes on today. It's still happening today, but it just was a frustrating time for me. And so I took my frustrations and because I knew I wasn't going to be that. I wasn't going to try to do that. And so I was frustrated. So I put my frustrations into a project, and that's what was the Slaughterhouse.
As we sort of wind down this interview, you mentioned earlier that back in 2000 that you were diagnosed with MS. How are you feeling these days, and how have you been able to maintain your health?
I feel good. I feel good. I made a lot of dietary changes over the last, you know, 14 or so years, just slowly and gradually dietary changes. Super active. Go to the gym 3 to 4 days a week. Uh, I started running again. I didn't run this year yet, but I started running again. I hadn't run since high school, football. And I just stay really active. I keep my mind busy, and I keep my body moving. I'm not in the gym trying to lift a whole bunch of weights. That's not really the goal. The goal is to have physical dexterity, to be able to move and walk and, you know, touch your toes and jump up in the air and land and have balance. And so I focus on all of those things. And I just think the diet changes and the working out are the probably the two most important parts of why I've been able to kind of sustain my quality of life. There are people that have had it as long as me that are already in wheelchairs, and so I'm blessed to still be able to jump around on stage like a knucklehead and have fun and entertain people at the same time.
What's your regular dietary schedule like? What do you eat? What do you don't eat?
Um, I eliminated all the white foods. That was the first one of the first things I did. So white rice, white flour, white sugar, white pasta. I eliminated all of those things from my diet. That was one of the first things I did. Um, I started doing brown everything, brown bread, brown pasta, brown rice. I started reading the backs of labels and found out that high fructose corn syrup was in everything.
Oh yeah, it is.
And so I started eliminating high fructose corn syrup from completely. Like I don't touch anything that has that in it. Even if it says corn syrup, I won't drink it or eat it. I So those are like the kind of the early things that I started to do. More recently, uh, 5 years ago, I stopped eating beef. 1 year ago, I stopped eating chicken, and now I just eat fish. But I eat fish maybe two twice a week, maybe 3 times at the most a week, and the rest of my meals are either vegetarian or vegan meals.
Okay.
I believe I'm on my way to vegan lifestyle. I just know that because when I'm on the road, eating vegan can be difficult just because eating out a lot and you don't know what they're preparing stuff with, and
Yeah, yeah.
when you're dealing with language barriers and things of that nature, it's kind of hard to communicate. Um, well, can you not use butter to cook it, or like some of those kinds of things are a little bit tricky. So um, I see myself definitely being vegetarian, maybe long term being vegan, but all of those things have made a difference.
If there is some sort of a nugget of knowledge, a lesson that you could sort of extract out of your life or career that anybody listening to this, whether they know who you are or are a music artist, whatever they do, that they could extract from your life and apply it to their own life, what would sort of that lesson be?
Um, I always tell aspiring artists to make music your plan B. Um, And that's the example that I lived by. I was in college. I rapped, but I was in college. I got my degree. The year after I got my degree was when first walked into a studio and actually started recording songs. And um, had music not worked out, because in most cases music doesn't work out for people. Music is a lottery ticket. You know, there's a lot of people playing, but very few people actually hit. And so, had music not worked out for me, I had a degree. I was gonna go into marketing and get a job in advertising, and I was gonna be writing, Budweiser commercials or something. Um, but it happened to work out for me. But I always tell these young aspiring artists that make music your plan B, have your plan A in place. And a lot of these kids, it's like sports didn't work out. I didn't get a scholarship. Music, and they just go right to music. That's like the next thing. Um, and none of them think about a long term career, a long term quality of life. They think that if they stay at it long enough and keep writing rhymes and keep recording joints, eventually it's gonna happen for them. And I got bad news for them. It doesn't eventually happen for everybody. And if you make music your one and only plan, and it doesn't work out, you're gonna be living with your mother, gonna be 40 years old, and it's not gonna be a good look.
Good, good, good. Yeah, I like to end any of my interviews with the same question. Who is somebody that's been a part of your life or career that I could realistically interview for this podcast that would have some good stories or lessons to tell?
Wow, it's a lot of people. I would say Strickland, if you're talking about, because he came into I met him in 2000, and he came with me on the Disposable Arts tour, and ever since that tour, '01, we've been on the road together ever since. So he's been a part of the kind of the new beginning phase of my career from Disposable Arts forward, and he has a lot of memories about those days and the last 17 years of being on the road with me, and he definitely be a good person to talk to.
That's what's up. That's up. All right, it's been great talking with you. If anybody wants to find out more information about you or listen to any of your projects, where can they go online?
Well, my Facebook is Masta Ace Official. My Twitter is at Masta Ace, and my Instagram is at Masta Ace Pics, Pics. You can catch me on any of those, and you can find my music on really all digital outlets pretty much. And hhv.de, they put out my most recent album, and they have it on vinyl, CD, and cassette, as well as digitally. Um, I will not promote streaming sites, although some of my music is on streaming sites. I won't be promoting those.
Oh yeah, and before we get out of here, you do have a new album coming out with Marco Polo, correct?
Yes,
What's the status on that?
it is being mixed. We're at the artwork phase and the mixing phase, and we have photos. Everything's taken. We're just trying to pull together an album cover, and we're close. If we hand it in, we're supposed to hand it in August 11th. Let's see what happens. If we do, then it'll be out in October.
Awesome. Can't wait to hear that. It's been great talking with you. You've been one of my favorite MCs of all time. Somebody that always, just definitely wows me and inspires me anytime I hear a project from you.
Thanks.
So it was great talking with you.
Thank you, man.
So that was my interview with Masta Ace. If you caught the end of his interview, he mentioned that he has an album coming out with Marco Polo. It looks like they have put a release date on that since we did that interview, and it looks like That album, which is called A Breukelen Story, is due out on November 9th of 2018. So be out on the lookout for that. And there's all sorts of links that I'll have in the show notes at freshasthepodcast.com, where you could follow Masta Ace online to be aware of everything that he has going. And definitely, if you have never heard Masta Ace before, go listen to something, anything. It really doesn't matter. Go on Spotify or whatever and listen to any one of his albums. He's been so influential to hip-hop and so many MCs. And when you listen to his albums, he is the person who has influenced other ones. You're gonna hear him sound. You're gonna hear like, oh, that sounds like so and so. That sounds like so and so. They were influenced by Masta Ace, and I know he was very humble about it in our interview, but he's definitely been one of the most influential hip hop artists, hip hop MCs to ever grace the microphone. So it was super cool, and I was super honored to be able to interview him for episode 100. And hopefully we'll be able to talk with other hip hop artists that have been as influential to hip hop as Masta Ace. So thank you, Masta Ace, for being on Fresh as the Word. So without further ado, let's get on to the Fresh as the Word Fresh Pick of the Week. This episode's pick is the new album Cerebral Apex from the Detroit hip-hop artist Novelist, a member of the group Clear Soul Forces. Novelist is a bit of a pioneer in his own right by paving his own lane. While he dives into your classic hip-hop boom-bap sounds, he injects his own interest in his rhymes. The album is based off a manga book that Novelist is currently writing and would love for this to be the soundtrack one day to the anime form of it. Novelist is the type of artist that wants to use hip-hop to bridge the gap with like the nerd fandoms and art forms out there. And Cerebral Apex is a great effort in bridging that gap in a very cool way where it's accessible to audience of all sorts and all ages. So if you want to, hear Cerebral Apex, I definitely have it embedded and linked up in the show notes at an episode 100 at freshasthepodcast.com. And before we get out of here, I definitely want to give a shout out to Knox Money, Bang Belushi, and Followmouth for the theme music for Fresh as the Word. And definitely want to remind you how you can support the podcast. You can always go to freshasthepodcast.com and share any of the links that you see on the website on any of your social media platforms. And you can also subscribe to Fresh as the Word on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Mixcloud, Google Play, and TuneIn. Just type in Fresh as the Word. It should come up. Click subscribe or follow or whatever it says. And please, if you can, leave a rating and a review, especially on Apple Podcast. Would definitely help out the show and to further grow it. You can follow me online at Twitter and Instagram at Kelly Omega Fresh, and on Facebook at facebook.com/KFresh. And then also you can follow Fresh as the Word online on Twitter on FITW Podcast, and Instagram at Fresh as the Word Podcast, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Fresh as the Podcast. So that's been episode 100. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Later on this week, episode 101 with Detroit techno pioneer Carl Craig. Until then, goodbye and good night.
Fresh is the word.